A political prisoner was imprisoned because he opposed the racism practiced by his government against the people. He decided he would do the impossible to escape, but he was imprisoned on the second floor, so it was impossible for him to dig a tunnel or escape through the window. His only option was to leave through the door. However, the problem was that his cell had two doors, an inner door and an outer door. The outer door couldn't even be opened from the inside. Its lock mechanism was on the outside. Besides these two doors, there were 8 more doors in his way, so he had to penetrate 10 doors in total to escape from prison. One might think that escape was impossible, but this prisoner was going to use his brain and craft very innovative tools. I won't spoil this surprise by revealing these tools now, but they were going to help him penetrate all the doors and execute the escape operation. What are these tools, and how did he make them while inside the prison? Follow the story to find out. Our story takes place in the 1970s in South Africa. For those unfamiliar, South Africa has endured a history of colonization, particularly by the British and Dutch. As a result of this colonization, it is a country with the largest population of European descent in Africa. Despite being a minority, these Europeans enforced a system of racial segregation against the Black and African population, who are the indigenous people of the country. Under this system of apartheid, which lasted from 1948 to 1994, South Africa, especially its African population, resisted, fought, and struggled to end this regime. One of the most iconic figures of this resistance was Nelson Mandela, who took up arms against apartheid and was imprisoned for 27 years before becoming the first African president of South Africa. South Africa became one of the staunchest supporters of Palestine because they understood the history of occupation and apartheid, knowing that such oppression can only be countered through resistance. Despite apartheid benefiting the white minority, there were honorable white individuals who opposed this regime. Our story begins with 2 such individuals, Tim Jenkins and Stephen Lee. Both were South African white activists against apartheid. One of the tactics Tim Jenkins employed was planting what appeared to be bombs in public spaces, which upon detonation revealed pamphlets urging resistance against the government and the apartheid system. Tim and Stephen continued their resistance activities for years, but like any oppressive government, the security forces in South Africa at the time were stringent, employing surveillance and intelligence systems. Eventually, they were discovered, and security forces raided their homes, leading to their arrest. In January 1978, Tim and Stephen were imprisoned in Pretoria, one of the toughest prisons in South Africa, known for its maximum security. They were charged with terrorism and sentenced to 12 years. However, what the prison administration and guards didn't know was that Tim and Stephen were determined to escape even before their court sentencing. For them, it seemed impossible to remain in this prison for such a long time, but this prison was tough, with many security measures in place to thwart any escape attempts. The walls were made of iron mesh, 6 meters high. Armed guards patrolled the prison rooftops day and night, and at night, dogs were released into the prison yards. Dogs trained to sniff out and chase any escaping prisoners in the blink of an eye. When the guards escorted Tim and his friend Stephen to their cell for the first time, they noticed the multitude of doors they passed through, one door after another. These doors varied, some heavy, some barred, and some simple wooden doors. With so many doors, it felt as if the prison consisted entirely of doors from their earliest days there. During recreation time and when leaving their cells, they always explored every corner they could, examining the walls, exits, and entrances, trying to find any possible vulnerabilities. They soon realized that escaping would be incredibly difficult and complicated. Tim and Stephen weren't the only political prisoners in the jail. There were 10 others besides them, making a total of 12. All of them were housed in the same section, with their cells adjacent to each other. This section was on the second floor, making escape via tunneling or window impossible. The windows were too high, leaving the cell door as the only possible exit. Of course, the cell door was locked. Tim, though not an expert locksmith, had some previous experience playing with locks, occasionally opening them with wires. He had a general understanding of how locks worked, so he began to closely examine the lock on the cell door, envisioning its inner workings and components, even imagining the shape of the key needed to open it. Then, an idea struck him. He took a piece of paper and placed it over the lock, drawing its dimensions. He wanted to know the size of the key required to open it. Next, he took another piece of paper, folded it, and placed it along with a pencil inside the lock. This time, his aim was to measure the depth of the lock. He conducted these experiments using basic tools, considering it was the year 1978, and technology wasn't as advanced as it is today. After getting the measurements, he drew a sketch of the key, estimating its dimensions. Now, the question was, how could he make the key? The idea that occurred to him was to fashion it from wood. They had access to woodworking tools in the prison workshop, where they were allowed to make various wooden items. So, he decided to attempt making a wooden key. Of course, the concept of a wooden key was unusual and seemed strange, even to Stephen when Tim shared the idea with him. Stephen doubted whether a wooden key could open the lock, even if the measurements were accurate. However, they had nothing to lose by trying. Tim began crafting the key during his workshop hours, under the watchful eyes of the guards. The process was slow, and Stephen always tried to cover for him. After a full week of work, he finally managed to fashion the key. The next challenge was to smuggle the key out of the workshop without arousing suspicion. The solution lay in their coffee cups. Every prisoner had one, and even these cups were inspected. However, they discovered that the base of the coffee cup could be unscrewed, revealing a small compartment. Tim placed the key inside this compartment, cushioning it with paper to prevent it from rattling. During the routine inspection after leaving the workshop, the guards checked each prisoner's cup, ensuring they were empty. But when it was Tim's turn, they found nothing suspicious, thanks to the hidden compartment. With the key safely concealed, Tim returned to his cell. Once the guards left the section, Tim wasted no time in trying the key. He inserted it into the lock, his heart pounding with excitement. However, his enthusiasm quickly faded when the key failed to turn the lock. Despite his disappointment, Tim had anticipated this possibility. The choice of wood wasn't arbitrary. As the wooden key turned inside the lock, it left marks, indicating where the lock's mechanisms engaged. Though the attempt failed, Tim had gathered valuable information. He now knew where the key needed to be modified. This setback didn't deter him. Instead, it fueled his determination to find a way out of their confinement. He had a small piece of iron, so he sat down to use it. He used this piece of iron to dig into the keyholes in the places where the lock was marked. He tried to carve out the spots where the key got stuck so that he could make the proper shape. He kept digging into the key and inserting it into the lock, trying and trying again. He repeated this action until, in the end, the wooden lock finally opened. In that moment, he felt a sensation beyond description, a feeling of triumph, of euphoria, a feeling as if he had accomplished a great feat. But he knew this was just the beginning. This lock he had opened was the first door of the cell. It was just a barred door, but behind it was another reinforced iron door. A complete door this time, not just bars. And you know what's worse? This door didn't have a lock from inside the cell. It could only be opened from the outside. And you see, Time knew this. He wasn't suddenly surprised by this door in front of him. He knew there were two doors to the cell, and he knew that after he opened the first door, the one with the bars, he would face the problem of the second door, the door that had no lock from inside the cell. He was walking in a systematic problem-solving manner. First, deal with the problem in front of you, and then think about the problems that follow. There was a small window next to the door, through which the prisoner could reach his hand, but it was impossible to reach the lock of the outer door from this distance. In any case, before Time could figure out a way to reach the lock from inside the cell, he first had to make the appropriate key for it. The only opportunity Time had to take measurements of the outer lock was on Fridays, which was the day of cleaning the section. Every Friday morning, the guards would take the prisoners out of their cells to clean the section and the corridor in front of the cells. By the way, all the prisoners in this section were political prisoners, so they were all cooperative. They knew about the plan and what they were doing. On the contrary, they covered for them and warned them when the guards were coming. At first, Time tried to use the same key he used for the inner door, but it didn't work. So, he took measurements of the key in the same way he did for the first lock. He got paper and a pen and measured the depth and drew an approximate shape of the key. Then he made the key in the workshop and smuggled it out the same way, in a coffee cup. After that, he kept trying this key and modifying it with a small piece of iron until the new key worked. Remember, the door was open now because they were cleaning the section and the corridor. So when he tried the key, it didn't open the lock. When he tried to turn the lock again to open it, he discovered that the lock was stuck. The iron lock was sticking out and it wouldn't let the key enter. It would go in and come out of the lock normally, but it wouldn't turn the lock. He kept trying and trying, but to no avail. By the time cleaning was about to finish and the guards were about to return, he tried hitting the lock with his hand and tried every possible way, but everything failed. The lock wouldn't budge. In the end, the guards gave up and left Time to return to his cell. Of course, the guards saw the lock, but instead of blaming the prisoners or thinking that one of them had tampered with the lock or made a key for it, they blamed each other. They thought one of them had left the lock in this condition, so they didn't complain about the prisoners. Anyway, it wasn't a disaster. They opened the lock with keys, closed the door, and locked it again. So here, Time took a deep breath of relief because he was afraid they would search the cells and find the wooden keys. But fortunately for him, things went in his favor this time. But after this incident, after Time and Stephen consulted between them, they decided not to try the lock again, and the door remained open. Now let's go back to the main problem. I told you that the lock of this outer door could only be opened from the outside, and the small window next to the door was too far for the prisoner to reach the lock opening. So Time and Stephen were puzzled by this problem for a long time, just sitting and thinking about it. Finally, one day, inspiration struck Taim. They forgave him for keeping the cleaning brushes in their cells. So he came up with a creative invention. He got a wooden cube and attached the key to it, using a screw to secure the wooden cube to the end of the broomstick. Now, he could extend the stick and turn this wooden piece with the key inside the lock. An ingenious and innovative invention to the highest degree. Of course, trying such an invention was risky because it might make noise, and the guards conducted random inspection rounds from time to time. And of course, Time, being the watchful eye and ear, was vigilant for any sounds of approaching guards near their section. He reached out through the window, holding the broomstick, and even tied it to his hand with a small rope so he could easily retrieve it if it fell. Time extended his hand, trying to reach the lock and insert the key into it, while with his other hand, he held a small mirror to see where the lock opening was, because he couldn't stick his head out of the window due to the bars on it. He tried and tried to insert the key into the lock, but the process was extremely difficult. Finally, after a long period and many attempts, he managed to insert the key into the lock. He took a deep breath, relieved and relaxed. His nerves finally calmed down. Then he tried to turn the key in the lock, but unfortunately, it didn't turn. So Tame took the broomstick again and started working on the key with the small piece of iron, adjusting it according to the marks on the key that indicated where it got stuck or where it hung into the lock when it was inside. He kept at it like this for several nights, trying every night for as long as possible, for several hours, while trying to get this key to work. Imagine that this operation took him a full 2 months. It required him to change the lock more than once, which made the task extremely difficult to the highest degree. But despite that, he didn't lose hope and continued trying until one day, finally, he managed to unlock the door. After hundreds or perhaps even thousands of attempts, the joy he felt at that moment was indescribable. Maybe he had never experienced such a joy in his entire life. It was a great triumph for them, meaning they could finally get out of their cells and open those 2 doors easily. And mind you, all their cells had the same lock. It was natural. They didn't make a specific lock for each cell. Now the next door came, which was the door they could only try during the cleaning period we talked about earlier, the period that happens every Friday morning. First of all, before trying to make a new key, he would attempt the keys he had, hoping that one of them would work. The sweet surprise came when he tried the first key, the key to the inner door of the cell. They were using the same lock for the department's door. Here, you can't imagine the joy they felt. They saved themselves a lot of effort, and not just a little. Now they could open their cell doors and the door to their department easily. Now, Stephen suggested, why don't we try to get out through the main door or the staff door or any door that leads outside? If I can make keys for all those doors, we can bypass any other doors that might obstruct us. Stephen felt the idea was a bit crazy because they didn't know how many doors were ahead of them or where they could find the door that would lead them outside. They didn't know the layout of the prison. To know the layout of the prison precisely, they needed to go and see the exact route they needed to take after leaving their cells and their department. Stephen made a plan. He claimed to have severe tooth pain, and since there was no dentist in the prison, they had to take him out to see a dentist. If they took him out of the prison, He would know how many doors they needed to cross and the exact route they needed to take. After Stephen went to the dentist and crossed all the doors, he knew the route they needed to take. When he returned to them, he had some unwelcome news. He told them that he had crossed 7 doors after leaving the department. In total, they had 10 doors to cross to escape from the prison, but at least now they had a clear plan of the route they would take. At this stage of the operation, they felt they needed an additional member in the team. They had become friends with one of the prisoners who was imprisoned for the same charge. His name was Alex Marseille. When they offered him the idea of escaping with them, he immediately became enthusiastic. He wanted to join them from the start, but he didn't want to impose himself. Stephen explained to them the plan of the route they would take, a route full of doors they needed to open. To illustrate the place and the route they needed to take, he drew a simplified diagram. Here we have the section of the cells, the first 2 doors, of course. They needed to open. We'll call them door 1 and door 2. After leaving the cell, they would face the department door, which is door number 3. After crossing it, they would come across stairs. These stairs would take them down because, as we said, they were on the 2nd floor. Then comes door number 4. After crossing it, there's a corridor, and at the end of this corridor is door number 5. But before door number 5, there's a room which is the main guard room. Usually the guard on duty in the department is present there. After crossing door number 5, door number 6 comes next. Then door number 7, which was made of bars. After that, door number 8, then door number 9, followed by a small staircase. This staircase leads to door number 10, which is the door that leads them outside the prison. Keep in mind, door number 10 seemed to always lead outside the prison. It appeared to be a door for guards or staff to enter the prison directly. So if they reached this door and went out, they would leave the prison immediately without having to pass through the prison yard or face the guard dogs or armed guards who stood and watched from the rooftops. However, the challenge was to pass through all these doors in front of them. Now, passing through all these doors, as they had in mind, was more complicated than this simplified plan. But this plan was helpful for them to understand the route they needed to take and to have a clear picture of the place. Now they had surpassed the first 3 doors. The 4th door they faced after descending the stairs, the advantage they had with this door was that they would see it and pass through it daily because it was the door that led them to the workshop, the outdoor courtyard, and other areas of the prison. Every day, they would watch the guards open this door in front of them. So, Tem focused and observed the shape and size of the key, trying to memorize it in his mind. The key wasn't much different from previous ones, so he fashioned an approximate key from memory, similar to the ones before. But now the problem was how they would test it. This door wasn't close to them, so getting out of their cells, their section, and descending the stairs to reach it posed a significant risk. To minimize this risk, they had to be cautious. They needed to watch the guards and their behavior. One piece of information they discovered was that there was only one guard responsible for their section from dusk till dawn. Usually the dogs were released into the courtyard, and armed guards were present on the rooftops. Nevertheless, as mentioned, they didn't need to go out into the courtyard. They just needed to beware of the guard inside, who typically stayed in the guard's office. Of course, there were different guards taking shifts, but there was one guard who consistently took the night shift. Fortunately for the prisoners, this guard had a fixed routine that he never deviated. Every night he played music through the internal sound system and the speakers in the cells. This meant he would sit in his office, relax, and listen to the music along with the prisoners. After the music finished, he would get up, leave his office, and go on his inspection rounds in the cells. So during the period when the music was playing, the prisoners could be sure he was in his office. They utilized this time when the music was playing and slipped out of their cell. When they did, they were armed with the file, and they made their way to door number 3, descending the stairs to reach door number 4 below. They began to try the new key. As usual, the key didn't work the first time, but Tem was ready and had the file with him. He immediately began to adjust the key, becoming an expert at this task. Everything was easier this time. Surely it wouldn't be difficult for him to reach out with a stick, as he had done with the cell door he had struggled with for 2 whole months. From the first attempt with door number 4, he managed to adjust the key and unlock the lock swiftly. They quickly ascended the stairs and returned to their section and cells, and it only took a few minutes before the music stopped, and the night guard began his inspection rounds. He came out of his room towards their cells. Now they could open 4 doors out of 10, but the more they progressed, the more difficult the task became, as the doors kept getting farther and farther away from their cells. Now, they were facing the 5th door, literally in front of the guard's office. How could they reach that door and conduct experiments on it while the guard was in the room next to them. Even if such a thing were possible, the risks were extremely high. If they were caught, their sentence would be extended. They needed a way to test the fifth door without the guard being present in the office. The only time the guard wasn't in the office was when he went on his inspection rounds. He would leave the office, walk down the corridor, then climb the stairs and reach their cells. How could they at the same time leave their cells and reach the fifth door through the same route he took? The solution they came up with was to hide under the stairs. They noticed a small cupboard that could accommodate 2 or 3 people beneath the stairs. Since they knew that this guard played music, and after the music ended, he would leave his office to conduct his inspection rounds, they could leave their cells while the music was playing and wait for the guard to leave his office. Then they would cross through gate number 4 and descend the stairs, hiding in the cupboard until the guard passed by. After that, they would emerge and head towards door number 5 to conduct their experiments. After discussing the plan multiple times and rehearsing it, they decided to proceed with it. It seemed to be the best plan they could think of. The first step was to arrange the blankets in a way that made it look like someone was sleeping underneath them. This was to deceive the guard during his inspections. When the music started, it would be their signal to act. First, they had to unlock the outer door of the cell. One of them took out a broom and began trying to insert the key into the lock, a task that proved to be challenging and time-consuming. After several attempts, they finally managed to unlock the door and open it. Then, without wasting any time, they went to the neighboring cell, where the guy named Cass was. He quickly opened his cell door and both of them rushed out of the section's door, descended the stairs, and reached the cupboard beneath them. Inside the cramped space of the cupboard, they were both tense to the extreme. It was the first time they would be outside their cells, and there was a guard passing by. What made matters worse was that when they entered the small cupboard, they faced a problem they hadn't anticipated. There was no way to lock the cupboard from the inside. The handles were on the outside, and there was no internal locking mechanism. Cass was the one holding the door closed with his hand trembling, partly from holding onto the small protrusion that served as a makeshift handle, and partly from fear. The situation was far from reassuring, especially with the guard walking so close to them. Imagine the level of tension they were experiencing. It was a truly terrifying situation, but fortunately, luck was on their side. The guard didn't notice them or the open cupboard door in front of him. His attention was focused on the stairs, and he continued on his way without even glancing at the cupboard or its open door. Despite the fear and tension they felt, they knew they didn't have much time. As soon as they heard the guard entering the cell section, they emerged from the cupboard and headed towards door number 4. Luckily, the guard hadn't locked the door behind him, so they didn't even need to use the key they had crafted. It seemed to be a habit of the guard to leave doors unlocked when he went to the cells, assuming there were no prisoners behind him. Both of them passed through door number 4 and emerged directly into the corridor. They headed towards door number 5, and as soon as they reached it, the first thing they tried was the old keys, and luck was on their side, as the key to door number 4 was the same as the key to door number 5. So they passed through door number 5, but then they faced door number 6, which looked completely different, clearly reinforced. Immediately, they began their attempts on the lock. At that time, the guard was conducting his routine inspection rounds, passing by the cells, glancing through the windows. When he looked through one of the cell windows, he saw the shape of the blankets, indicating someone was sleeping underneath them. Stephen, who was in his cell, was tense as he watched the guard inspecting. Knowing his companions outside were aware that the guard usually took around 15 minutes to complete his inspection rounds. They had set themselves a time window of approximately 15 minutes before they had to return. So now the hacker was attempting to unlock the 6th door. Initially, he tried the keys he had, but none of them opened the lock. He continued his attempts, with the hacker watching anxiously, constantly reminding him of the time. They tried several things on the lock, including metal wires, but all their attempts failed. What made this situation even more difficult was that they were under immense pressure, causing their hands to tremble literally when their self-imposed 10-minute time limit was up. The hacker insisted they had to retreat, saying they were out of time, but he continued trying, telling him to wait just a little longer. He became so desperate that the hacker literally had to grab him and pull him back quickly from the corridor to the stairs, rushing back to the small closet. Only moments later, they heard the guard's footsteps descending the stairs. If they had delayed any longer, they would likely have been caught. Finally, they managed to catch their breath after seeing the guard cross from the 4th door and exit into the corridor toward his office. Then, They immediately exited the closet and climbed the stairs to the second floor, returning to their cells. They both felt a sense of defeat, even though they managed to bypass one door, at least the fifth door. But they wanted to surpass more than one door in the same night, because this escape attempt posed high risks. And the more attempts they made, the higher the chance of getting caught. Stephen in his cell felt particularly stressed, unable to sleep due to the pressure, especially concerning the sixth door lock. He knew he couldn't afford to risk going back and attempting the sixth door again, unless he was sure he would succeed. During this time, they crafted keys not only for the doors on their route, but also for different doors in the prison. One of them was a hidden side door, possibly leading them to the workshop. And they even crafted a key for the workshop door itself. The workshop, in reality, had several doors from various directions, so they crafted keys that could potentially lead them there, enabling them to sneak in and take the tools they needed at any time. With these keys, they seemed almost like one of the prison guards. However, their main focus was on the sixth door lock. The hacker pondered on a new approach to craft a special key for this door, one with a very high chance of success. After reaching the idea and designing a unique key made of metal wires with a wooden head, allowing him to switch between multiple heads quickly. He could also move the key easily inside the lock, because the wires could penetrate deeper into the lock, enabling him to move the key up and down and at different angles, something he couldn't achieve with the regular wooden keys. This gave him more freedom and allowed for slight variations in the key's shape to fit the lock perfectly. With the completion of this design, he felt that he had finally created the tool that would enable him to open door number 6 without any doubt. But his aim wasn't just to open door number 6. He wanted to bypass all the doors in one night. This, of course, would require more time. So their companion, Stephen, who remained in his cell, had to come up with a plan to keep the guard occupied and prolong his inspection tour. As the night of execution approached, when the prisoners heard the music start, they began their movements. They came out of their cells, and the hacker joined them. Together, they descended the stairs and reached the closet below, hiding there and waiting until the music stopped. Afterward, they heard the guard and saw him crossing over and heading up to the cells. Immediately, they crossed from the fourth door to the corridor and headed towards the fifth door. They opened the fifth door with the key from the fourth, and now it was time for the sixth door. Meanwhile, in the cells, Stephen began executing his plan to engage the guard. He knew that this guard was fond of rugby, one of the most popular sports in South Africa. So he engaged him in conversation about the game, discussing wins and losses and how the matches were. The guard continued chatting with him as he enjoyed the game. Meanwhile, the hacker was still attempting to unlock the sixth door, using the wire key with 3 wooden heads, maneuvering it within the lock with greater ease due to the wires' flexibility, allowing for more movement and angles. He kept turning the key left and right, up and down, trying in every possible way to unlock the lock, but he didn't hear the sound of it unlocking. Finally, the lock opened, and once again excitement surged through them. They immediately passed through the sixth door and found themselves facing the seventh door. The seventh door was made of iron bars, and the lock on this door was different. As soon as they saw it, they knew they were in trouble, because the screws were visible. One of the tools they had with them was a small knife, usually allowed by the prison authorities for cutting bread. They used this knife to unscrew the lock, and it quickly came apart. Then, they tampered with the lock from the inside in a way that made it open with a simple movement. After fixing the lock back in place, they realized that the seventh door, which had seemed impenetrable, could now be opened with a wire or a piece of iron, allowing them to pass through. They then proceeded to the next door, the eighth door, which luckily was already open. Moving on to the ninth door, they found a similar lock to the previous ones. They tried the keys they had with them and discovered that the door could be opened with the same key that opened the fourth and fifth doors. Meanwhile, back in their cells, Stephen was still trying to engage the guard in conversation. Even though he talked about rugby and his family, Stephen knew he couldn't keep the guard distracted for long. His companions needed to finish their task quickly and return. Finally, they reached the 10th door, knowing the time was running out and they should return. This door was a regular wooden door like those in apartments. It was supposed to lead them out of the prison. However, unlike the other doors, the lock on this door was different. They didn't have time to try to open it, so they decided to leave it and quickly moved toward the stairs, hiding in the closet below. They waited for the guard to come down, and indeed, within a minute or two, the guard descended. As soon as he left the fourth door, they emerged from the closet ascended the stairs, and returned to their cells. This night was a major accomplishment. They managed to pass through all the doors except the last one. The next day, they gathered in the prison yard as usual to discuss their next move. They felt that the time for escape had come, although they hadn't opened the 10th door yet. With the accumulated experience, they believed they could find a way. This time, Stephen would join them. He wouldn't be in his cell to distract the guard, allowing them more time. Because this time, they knew that this would be the time they would actually escape. As I mentioned before, all of them were political prisoners, sharing the same ideology and supporting each other. In their section, they were all ready to support each other in their operation. Even though they wouldn't escape with them, they kept in mind that it was nearly impossible in the regular prison for other inmates to cooperate and support each other in the same way. The person they considered the leader of the political prisoners in the prison was named Dennis Goldberg. He assured them he would help and try to distract the guard. The plan they came up with was to cut off the power to their section. The power switch was located on the staircase they descended after exiting the section door. If they cut the power, Dennis could call the guard and ask him to check the situation, distracting him. Finally, on the promised day, December 11th, 1979, they were filled with excitement and tension. They tried to calm themselves and focus on their task. The first step was changing into civilian clothes they had stolen from one of the buildings in the prison. As I mentioned earlier, they had made keys for different doors in the prison other than the 10 doors on their route. They managed to steal some tools and civilian clothes, which were an essential part of the plan. If they were to escape the prison, wearing their prison clothes would draw attention from the guards or even people outside. So they waited in their civilian clothes for the guard to turn on the music, as usual. As soon as the music started, Tim moved and opened his cell door, then the inner door, and finally the outer door using the broom key. Then they quickly exited their cells, and Dennis, watching from his cell window, confirmed he would call the guard as soon as they cut the power. 3 of them exited through the section door, and as I mentioned, the power switch was on the wall of the staircase they descended after leaving the section door. They were heading down, and Tim opened the box and started playing with the wires inside, messing them up in a way that would make it difficult to fix quickly. While the guard took his time fixing it, they quickly went down to the small closet under the stairs. This was the first time they would hide in this closet. It was small and barely fit them. Inside, Dennis shouted at the guard at the top of his voice, telling him that the power and lights had gone out. Moments later, they heard the footsteps of the guard walking down the corridor, walking slowly and leisurely while they were at the peak of their tension, fearing that the closet doors might slip from their hands and open, as had happened the last time. However, after that, the guard passed through the 4th door and ascended the stairs without seeing them. He entered the cell block, and immediately after that, the 3 of them emerged from the hiding place and exited through the 4th door for the last time. They walked toward the 5th door as the guard reached the cell block. He was surprised to find the lights off and the electricity cut. He went to where Dennis was sitting and told him that the electricity had been cut suddenly, but he didn't leave immediately to check the electrical problem. Instead, he lingered, engaging in small talk, prolonging his stay. Meanwhile, Tim, Stephen, and Alex reached the 5th door and easily bypassed it, with the same key used for the 4th door. Then, they faced the 6th door, which, as mentioned earlier, had the toughest lock. However, they were prepared with their wire key, just like before. They managed to bypass it within 2 or 3 minutes after a few attempts. Then came the 7th door, which was made of bars. Its lock had already been dismantled, making it easy to open with any tool. So they bypassed the 7th door, followed by the 8th door, which was already open as usual. They opened the 9th door with the same key used for the 4th and 5th doors. Then, they encountered the small staircase leading them to the 10th door. They ascended the stairs and immediately started trying the keys they had on the lock. However, none of the keys seemed to work. Each unsuccessful attempt increased their tension. This was the worst nightmare they could face at this point. The keys not opening the lock of the 10th door. Due to the numerous keys they had crafted and the locks they had opened, they had reached a point where they felt like professional lockpickers. They couldn't even imagine that this last lock would defeat them. Meanwhile, the guard finished his conversation with Dennis and started walking toward the staircase to check the electrical issue. When he reached the breaker, he tried to fix the problem and adjust the wires. The 3 prisoners were still trying at the door, and they had been attempting for almost 20 minutes. The guard continued to try to open the lock with all the tools he had, but to no avail. After all this time, The guard managed to restore the electricity, completed his inspection round, and began to make his way back to the office. The three prisoners were still sitting by the door, and they heard the footsteps of the guard as he returned and opened the office door. This meant that the guard was now between them and their cells. If they considered returning, they would have to pass by the office, which was not an option. Their only choice was to continue trying to open the lock. Stephen and Alex decided they needed to escape now. There was no turning back. Alex took a metallic tool from their supplies, one of the tools they had stolen from the workshop, after making a key for it. Immediately, Tim objected, stating that attempting to break the lock would create a loud noise, which the guard would likely hear. However, Alex was determined. He took the tool and began to dig into the wooden frame around the lock. The wooden door was not reinforced or metallic like the sixth door. It was purely wooden. The sound of Alex's digging was indeed disturbing, and it caused Tim to be on edge, fearing that the guard would emerge from his office at any moment. Nonetheless, Alex persisted, breaking through the wooden door until suddenly it opened before them. It seemed that the guard had not heard them, as he did not come out of his office. Their relief at that moment cannot be adequately described. They knew they had to control their emotions and not let their heightened excitement overtake them, as they were still within the prison compound. They quietly opened the door and walked out as inconspicuously as possible, though they kept their heads down. They tried not to attract any suspicion, but as they walked a short distance away from the prison, they saw a car parked with guards from the prison standing beside it. They looked like they had just finished their shift and were heading home. At that moment, their hearts pounded with intensity, but they maintained their composure and continued walking. The guards didn't pay much attention to them. They exchanged a glance or two and resumed their conversation. In the end, the three of them were dressed in civilian clothes, which was not logical at all for prisoners to have. They continued walking until they reached one of the main streets in the city. At that moment, they finally felt the joy and triumph of their escape plan succeeding. Typically, in stories of prison escapes, there's the sad part where the escapees are caught after their escape. But this story was different. For the first time in the history of the channel, they were creating a prison escape story, where the prisoners were not apprehended after their escape. These three individuals had made a deal with a man from Zimbabwe, a neighboring country to South Africa. They agreed that he would help them escape to Zimbabwe. And indeed, they left South Africa with him, eventually making their way to Zambia and then Tanzania. From Tanzania, they managed to fly to London, where they settled. They lived there until the end of the apartheid regime in South Africa in 1994. I'm not sure whether they returned to South Africa or remained in London, or went elsewhere afterward. However, Tim Jenkin later wrote a book titled Escape from Pretoria, where he detailed the events of their escape with all its intricacies. This book was later adapted into a drama film, followed by documentaries and lectures worldwide about their remarkable escape story. And with that, we reached the end of the story. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, don't forget to like, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell. If you have some free time, there are other fantastic clips you can watch. See you in the next video, and goodbye.